We have topical questions. Question number 1, Willie Rennie.
To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on the national review of asthma deaths, which suggests that some deaths from the condition arise because of complacency amongst both medical staff and patients.
Health Secretary Mike Matheson. Minister.
Grateful for the promotion, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government is committed to providing the best quality care and treatment for people living with asthma in Scotland. We welcome the publication of the National Review of Asthma Deaths, the first major investigation of its kind. We will look closely at the key findings of this report to make sure that actions or learning is taken forward at a board level where appropriate. This will be part of a wider programme of work to develop and deliver improvements locally, including asking boards to review asthma deaths as part of their mortality review process. The Scottish Government continues to work closely with and support a number of initiatives in partnership with our third sector partners, including work in primary care, to drive forward the national improvements of asthma services.
I thank the Minister for that response. Even though I've had a direct interest in asthma all of my life, I was shocked by this report. For so many people to die for avoidable reasons will worry, I'm sure, the Health Minister. I want the Government today to make a clear commitment to step up its work on asthma in light of this report. The Government has produced a good set of standards in its Asthma Priorities document. It was published well over a year ago last February, but implementation of it is patchy. So in light of that report that's been published today, will he ask every health board to publish a report locally on the progress they are making on the implementation of those standards set out in asthma priorities?
Minister.
I recognise the member's long interest in this particular issue, and let me take a couple of the points that he's actually made. First of all is to consider what learning we can take from this national review. And one of the areas of work that we will now take forward is that we'll ask our National Advisory Group on respiratory managed clinical networks to consider each of the recommendations within this report and to consider what action then has to be taken forward at a localised level. And part of that will be about what local plans need to be developed by individual health boards on how they need to respond to these recommendations at a localised level. Because the member is right, the report highlights a number of areas where clearly patients and individuals with asthma are not receiving the services that they deserve and that they require. And there's clear learning there, both for patients and also for clinicians to take forward. So what I can give the member an assurance is that we will continue to drive forward the implementation of the national priorities, but alongside that is to make sure that the learning that comes from this national review is applied at a local level, and there will be national oversight on how we take that forward through our National Advisory Group on respiratory conditions.
Mr Rennie.
I don't doubt the Minister's absolute commitment to this, and as I say, I think some of the work that the Government has done in this area has been good. But the implementation is patchy, and I receive reports back from health professionals, including those who are closely involved in the managed clinical networks, who say they are frustrated that the local health boards are not treating this as sufficient priority. So all I'm asking for is a bit of transparency. I recognise that he'll drive the local health boards to make improvements, but will he publish those results so that local people, local campaigners, can press for improvements in those deliveries?
Minister.
As I mentioned in my earlier comments, the principal delivery body for taking this forward is our National Advisory Group on respiratory managed clinical networks. And the managed clinical networks have a key role to play in making sure that our boards are actually undertaking the work at a local level that's necessary for the services that have to be delivered, both at a secondary and also at a primary care level. One of the areas that we are considering is to review the managed clinical network establishment, to look at whether we have to change the way in which it's operating, to make sure that its guidance is being much more effectively implemented at a local level. And part of that will be looking at how we can make sure that boards are much more transparent in the actions that they are taking. Now, whether that comes in the form of a formal published report is something which I'm very open to, so that patients and individuals can see the progress that individual boards are making. But what I need to do is make sure that we consider the detail within this particular report to see how that can feed into the way in which the managed clinical network is operating at the present level, at the present stage, and to consider whether we should then review that whole process in order to make sure that we have a system in place which is robust and it's also transparent the way the member has suggested, but also to make sure, ultimately, it delivers the services on the ground that patients with asthma deserve.
Richard Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Government's circulation of a benchmark reporting template last year was welcome. I hope that, as Willie Rennie was saying, the results of that will now be published so that we can actually see what's happening. But will he immediately ensure that every patient who is prescribed more than 12 reliever inhalers in a year is reviewed? Is it something that can be done immediately? That it should just be a matter of course? Because if the report shows very clearly that this group are one of the ones that are most at risk.
Minister.
I think the member raises an important issue around the quality of clinical care that is provided to patients with asthma. And the report highlights, interestingly, that there was evidence of excessive prescribing of reliever medication, as well as an under-prescribing of preventer medication. Now, there are issues there in terms of clinical practice and how that's been taken forward by clinicians. That's why it's important the National Advisory Group are able to look at these recommendations and to consider what then necessary at a local level in order to address these issues. I'm sure he would recognise for me to do something immediately, well, there's already been a clinical decision made and something wouldn't be appropriate. But I think the point the member is driving at is one that we do need to address to make sure that clinicians are prescribing the right medication at the right time, whether it's preventative or whether it's a reliever, and at the same time that they're also reviewing that on a regular basis, because the report also highlights a lack of review that's taking place. So we've got an opportunity to use this review as a way of helping to drive forward those standards, not just in the way in which the service is delivered, but also the clinical standards that have been delivered by the clinicians providing these services.
Neil Findlay.
Worrying report, but and specifically in relation to childhood asthma, what implications does the report have for the way in which the NHS and schools work together to help pupils manage their condition?
Minister.
Well, the report in itself focused on the way in which care was delivered at an NHS level within primary care and also within secondary care itself. I'm aware there has been an ongoing issue in terms of children with asthma being able to receive their inhaler while in school, and there's an inconsistency in the way in which local authorities are applying that particular policy, who have a responsibility for taking this forward. Clearly that's an issue of concern, and one of the areas of work that we are also taking forward is a review of the guidance to local authorities in this particular issue. What should happen is that if a child requires medication, is that a healthcare plan should actually be taken forward for that child within their individual hospital, within their individual school, and then they should make arrangements for their medication to be provided for them. There are some legal complications around this matter in terms of teachers being able to do it and support staff having to do it. But because of the inconsistency that's been taken forward by different local authorities in this issue, we're reviewing the guidance, which goes back to 2001, to look at what we can do in order to get much more consistency approach across all of the local authorities in this area.
Thank you. That ends the topical question period. The next item of business is a debate on motion number 9915 in the name of Aileen Campbell on the National Youth Work Strategy.